large network of other consultants and coaches that we tap into, but we brought it all in-house. So I'm doing more coaching than I ever had, or much more coaching than I've ever had to before. And in actual fact, I should have told you, Jeevan, I'll have to leave at if this doesn't end by 2 o'clock, I'll have to finish, because I do have a coaching client immediately at 2 o'clock that is now being done through Zoom. So significant changes, significant financial consequences. We've had to let a small number of people go, but we do see light at the end of the tunnel, however, because the way we've rejigged our business.
Steve, over to you.
Yeah, thanks. So I work for National Australia Bank. And for those of you who may be dialing in from overseas, it's one of the big 4 banks in Australia. We have about 40,000 people working for us across Australia, New Zealand, internationally. And because of the nature of what we do, which is banking, lending money, deposits and so on to individuals and organisations, what we've found is there's, of course, a massive impact on our own employees, but a massive impact on our customers as well. So when you think about people losing jobs or reduced income, a lot of those folk have mortgages to pay, or are running small businesses that are closed now, so they have no cash flow. So they're asking for short-term loans and the like. So I have to say, as an organisation, I'm immensely proud of the way our leadership has responded to customer needs, put some things in place that I think are very thoughtful of what we need in the community. And then there's been a flow-on impact to our employees as well. So there's been an increase in queries into the call centres and through digital channels. So we've had to move people around into those channels, some of whom haven't worked in those areas for quite a while. So we're requiring a level of flexibility that we wouldn't have had before. We're also seeing an uptick in things like defaults and people under duress who are asking for help. So we've also had others flow into those areas to help our customers. So massive impact, not just in the way we work, but in what we're doing, in the way we're responding to our customers. And one thing I wanted to mention, Jeevan, was just a conversation I had yesterday with one of my peers. So one of the questions that you have here is, how do we recognise and reward employees? What we've started to talk about at the moment too is, what about employees who are vulnerable? So those who under mental stress or emotional stress, or who are trying to juggle homeschooling while they're doing their normal job as well. And that's probably just a couple of categories of vulnerable employees. There's probably many others as well. So how do we make sure that we're providing the support and resources to those folks so that we can all navigate through this period successfully?
Thanks, Steve. And I see a lot of names in the audience who will be able to give us really interesting stories, about what's happening. We've got a couple of startup founders, etc. So and Dale, who's just stepped into a new business role. So it'll be interesting to hear that. But I'll park that for the moment. Just want to give you some stats about the survey that we did. So first of all, in terms of the audience who registered, so we've got 17 online, but about 35 to 38 registered. So a lot of them, as you would expect, are HR, OD, or L&D professionals, 73%. Team and business managers about 10%, and others is 17%. So a preponderance of HR, OD, and L&D. But I'm hoping that this pie will, equally split amongst the three the audiences as we go along in these webinars in the coming months. The question we asked was, how has COVID-19 impacted your business plans? And as you can see from, and hopefully you can read the slide, 43% have said that's a major impact. That's a big number. 34% have said some impact, right? But I guess it came as a unpleasant surprise that 43% of the audience said that it had a major impact. We had another 3% who basically said the business has virtually stopped, and just about 3% who said there has been no impact. So, we still don't have the labor and employment statistics starting to flow through as the recent stats, but we do have some and kind of indicating a difficult time at the moment and also to continue. And these stats are there on the slide. Something I picked up from ABC Australia is, and these are only Australian stats, the numbers in the US, for example, and Europe are much bigger than these numbers. But new data seems to suggest that 780,000 people have lost their jobs by April 4th. The youngest and the old, which is actually above 70, so above 60, they've been hardest hit by the job losses. Hospitality has the greatest amount of losses, 25%, followed by the arts, 18.7. Good news for all of us in the HR and learning spaces. Education and training was the least affected sector, and only 0.1. So that was, kind of good news for us in a way. But some, stats just reflect the state of business is there. The next question we asked was, has the work that the employee that an employee does has changed due to COVID? And 57% said some impact. So Steve indicated that the people who've had to kind of switch roles and do new duties, they haven't done for some time. 30% indicated that quite a lot of change and some workforce has been stood down. So that combined is about, it's 87%. And another 3% have stopped work or doing something very different. So that's about 90%. Yes, it's only 7% who's kind of said there's been no impact. So very substantial impact on what employees do. So I think probably you just check with Steve, if you've got a couple of examples where you talked about people had to switch roles in a hurry, and how did you find that experience of identifying those people and helping them make that switch?
Yeah, so I'm hesitating because I'm not sure what I can share and what I shouldn't share. So, but I'll speak generally about it. So we have large operation centres. Obviously, people taking calls to answer customer queries, and it's a classic call centre type operation. Ebb and flow, supply and demand of work needs to be matched, and we had just a spike in queries. And the workforce that we had in place weren't sufficient to cover the amount of work. So, a lot of drop calls, a lot of long wait times. What we did was we put a call out to the rest of the organisation to ask who had worked in that area previously or had skills that they could quickly apply, and had a very positive, quick response. Hundreds of employees come forward to say, we're ready to help, we'll drop what we're doing. And in some cases, they were quite senior people who were willing to just jump on the phones to help customers, even though the work that they were doing day to day might be unrelated or more of a management level. Then there was a group of employees who needed a bit of training, but were willing to quickly train up and get in and help as well. So for us, that was quite unprecedented. We hadn't seen that before. Our internal systems and processes aren't really built to manage that kind of rapid deployment of people. And it's happened quite successfully, not without some long nights from certain people to make it work. But now we're looking at it and thinking, well, why don't we operate like this more like this on a BAU world? Why did we have to wait for a crisis in order to realise that some of our internal processes were really stopping us from being as effective as we can be? So I think that's probably the best example we have from the last month or so for us.
Thanks, Steve. Yeah, look, I'm sure there'll be a lot of examples. And if there's anybody in the audience who want to share, if they've seen workforce in their organization make this rapid switch to a new role, please, feel free to share it through chat. We'd love to hear from you. So the next question we asked is, what is your, so obviously with this massive impact that COVID-19 has had on businesses and the workforce and the work that they do, the question and the focus for this discussion really is, what is the impact on the way that people performance is measured and rewarded? And we have a case study to explore that a little bit further. And we asked a question, what has been your own approach to managing the impact of COVID? And as you can see that, I think 33% want to take the opportunity to kind of revise the performance and management and reward systems. I'm not sure, how much and what kind of change, but certainly, like they say, never let a good crisis go to waste. Seems to be the feeling amongst 33% of the audience. 30% were not sure, and you kind of don't know. And I think it's just. And that's perfectly natural in this state where we not quite sure what it is and how long it's going to last. 20% have said don't change and measure as the best as you can. So keep the current state and just get along with it, hopefully with the assumption that things will revert back to normal. 10% said suspend the performance measurement and reward system till things get back to normal, and 7% said use this opportunity to revise the job descriptions. So different approaches, and obviously there's no right or wrong answer, but we'd love to explore with the participants as to what their thoughts are a little bit later towards the end of the session. So let's very quickly go through the case study. I've sent the PDF in advance, and hopefully you had a time to read, but if you haven't, no problem, because it's a pretty simple case study. It's actually based on a use case that we've developed, and this one's easy to I guess imagine, because it's happening to a lot of people in sales. So the case study is Boyd, so not his real name, so kind of use a persona kind of an approach to define the case study. 48 years old, in IT services company. The company that Boyd works for has between 5,000 to 10,000 employees. The company is a major IT services company in Australia. 50% of the workforce is overseas. Very competitive environment, as you would imagine before COVID. Sales are to large, complex organizations. So we're kind of talking about maybe something like NAB or CBA kind of organizations. Therefore, it is one that does require a lot of expertise. Boyd works as a business development with a focus on new sales. So Boyd's role is actually to build a pipeline for new sales and new customers, which is a very challenging job in itself, but with a focus on the education and manufacturing industry. So that's universities and manufacturing. Good news for Boyd is that looks like manufacturing might increase now that we've kind of recognized the supply chain needs to be resilient. But the part of the job is also to ensure that the customers are happy with the delivery that they receive for the sales that Boyd has worked. So part of his job is to make sure that the customer is happy with the contracts that he's been responsible for signing. His aspirations, like for any salesperson, is to make bigger, better deals, to win bigger bonus, and take the family to Hawaii or buy a new car. And Boyd is kind of half interested in promotion. If it comes his way, he will take it up, but he's not running after it. He's probably more interested in winning bigger bonuses and getting the check through the door. The sales performance, as is measured currently, sales achievement is 65%. Customer feedback about project delivery 15%, and 10% is teamwork and company adherence to company values. The reward and REM is fixed salary, so got a certain slab of fixed salary, and then you've got a remuneration on achievement of sales target. So if Boyd achieves 90% of sales target, he gets 80% of the total bonus. If he achieves 100%, gets 100% bonus. If Boyd achieves 110% of the sales target, actually gets 120% of the bonus, and et cetera, et cetera. So the more he sells, better it is for Boyd. So here are some figures for his salary and bonus for the last couple of years. So in 2018, achieved, because Boyd was new to the company, achieved 90% of the target with a salary of 80,000 and a bonus of 16,000 that he got that year for his sales, achieve his sales target. So he got a total REM of 96,000 in 2018. In 2019, Boyd actually achieved 110% of his sales target, and you can see that the salary remained the same, but big jump in bonus, so 30,000. So his total REM moved from 96 to 110K, and the customer satisfaction rating also moved up. So he actually got 14,000 more than the year before. Now, before COVID came, his own projections were that he would achieve 110% of the sales target again, because business was looking fairly good, for a total remuneration of 127,000, with a bonus of 42. So it would have been a 17,000 increase over the previous year, but because of COVID, Boyd now thinks that he's only going to achieve his 50% of the sales target, probably get no bonus according to the current scheme, which means that he only gets his fixed salary of 85,000, which means that he's probably going to lose $25,000 over last year's salary. So that's the situation with Boyd. Business has slowed down for the company, and the customers are being very careful about where they're spending money or signing contracts. There is increased business from existing projects, so that's good. It's very likely that the sales targets for even next year is going to be impacted negatively because COVID might have a lingering effect for the next 6 months. What the company has done is that they've still not revised the targets, right? So they brought out a company announcement recognizing the impact of COVID, but they still haven't revised the target for the salespeople. 20% of the project delivery consultants have been laid off. Top management have taken a 20% cut, and the dividends have been reduced for shareholders. But the year-end performance appraisal are still planned at the end of June. So that is the that's the scenario there, and kind of options that we have, and there might be more as no change. Do we modify the targets? Do we scrap performance appraisals? Lay off the sales force, or anything else? So I probably want to throw it over to Steve. Steve, what's the solution you think you have? And look, if anybody else wants to share their own view, please do that through chat. So I would love to get your own solution through the chat window. So Steve, over to you.
David, I'm not sure I had the solution. Yeah, I'm not sure I had the solution. I've got some opinions that are my opinions. So happy to share those as points for discussion. And I did chuckle at the start of the call when you said there's probably people in the audience who are more knowledgeable on this topic than those on the panel. I imagine that's the case. I'm not an expert on performance and reward, although I seem to be having a lot of conversations in that space at work at the moment. So I'll bring some of that information into my thoughts here, and I'm very keen to hear others' responses, because I'm sure I'll be able to take them back to work and use some of them. But you gave us 3 questions. So one was around, would you change performance and appraisal this year, the approach to communication, and then would you modify rewards over the future? So I have I've tried to structure what I've written against those 3. And with the first one, I mean, the question is about performance appraisal, but I immediately started thinking about performance and reward and the link between the two. And particularly in the context of a salesperson. So something that we struggle with quite often is performance actually for development, or is it really about dollars and the bonus and promotion and an increase at the end of the year? And I haven't seen any organisation that has figured this out yet and structured it in a way where you can truly have a performance conversation that is about developing the individual, and then have a separate conversation which is about reward and outcome. So I did struggle with the question from that perspective. I'll be honest about that. But some of the things that I started to think about was, from a development perspective, could we change the weighting a little bit? So we know that there's not going to be a lot of new sales and bigger deals and so on. Should we look at changing the weighting from 65% on that particular part of the metric and putting a heavier emphasis on the customer rating, in particular the customer rating, because of the need for ongoing support that was mentioned in the case study. And then on the values, because I think in a difficult situation like we're facing right now, it is an opportunity for people to demonstrate the values of an organisation, to test those values, and people do step up and do things that are quite extraordinary. So from a development perspective, I thought that would make sense, where at the end of the year, if someone is getting a rating in a system or a program, and that's going to be enduring over time and might be used for future discussions around promotion or movement, then it would be good to adjust from that perspective and have a solid conversation around how someone's operating against those parameters and what they need to do to develop. Having said that, as you pointed out, the motivation of this particular individual is sales and commission, and being able to use his achievements to be rewarded, and then use those rewards for himself and his family. So if we go with the archetypical salesperson, they probably don't care too much about the score, independent of what it means for the income. So I think there just needs to be a balance there, and I'm not quite sure what the right answer is. One thing I would say is I think I would look to pay out bonuses, provided that the broader organisational goals were met. So most bonuses or often bonuses are linked to company performance as well as divisional performance. So all of those parameters would need to be met before individual performances are paid out. So that was kind of my thinking around those, and obviously there would be some thought given to, would you have to get rid of bonuses entirely? And I'll go on to the salaries one in a moment. I can just see there's some text coming through, and I just want the chat, and I just want to have a quick read.
Steve, I'll read the chat, and I'll jump in and let you know.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll do that. Don't worry.
All right, it's easier if we do that.
So
okay,
that's that people just giving their solutions. So we'll discuss that a little bit.
Okay.
Yeah. Feel free.
Okay, very good. So the other thing, I wanted to speak a little bit about reducing salaries, because we've seen this happen in the market. KPMG, Deloitte have both announced that they'll be reducing salaries. I've spoken to a friend of mine who's a partner at one of those firms about what that means for them and how people are responding. And also read an ABC article on what KPMG are doing. So I thought that one, it was interesting in the sense that those organisations can only propose that the salaries are reduced without reducing workload, and individuals are not necessarily required to accept that. They can reject it for legal reasons. I thought, that was just an interesting point to consider. I also think that in terms of the communication approach around what that means, so this second question around what approach we take to communicate change, it's a very broad question. I think obviously it's got to come top down, and there's many different ways you could have forums to discuss and communicate. I think it's really important that the leaders led their role model behaviour by cutting their salaries first. And we see that with those two examples that I mentioned. The partners are actually taking a bigger cut than they're expecting of their employees. So I applaud that. I mean, I would support that. I think that's what needs to be done. And I think the messaging needs to be around, we're sharing the pain so that people can stay, all of us can stay employed through this difficult period. And I think that's got to be the key kind of part of the key message around the communication is we're securing jobs so that when we emerge out of this, we can quickly get back to kind of full strength as we were before. And I think having spoken to people who are going through this at the moment in their own organisations, that gets lost a little bit. That messaging gets lost. People don't understand that it's almost a binary decision. Cut 20% of the workforce, arbitrary number, but cut 20%, or we all take a 20% cut, and then we all manage through this. And I think the other thing too that has become apparent when I've spoken to people about this is they say 20%, but it's prorated over the course of the rest of the year. And in terms of real terms over that period, it comes out as closer to 7 or 8% of the total salary. So it needs to be, I think, quite specific around what we're asking and what the numbers mean, and have open and honest discussions with employees about that. I think the final thing I'd say is this is the salary cuts. A lot of it it's all got to do with cost reduction. There are other ways to reduce costs, and I think organisations who have asked their employees how to reduce costs get a lot of better ideas. So if when we think about the employee experience, if we can use those methods to crowdsource opportunities to reduce cost, there are other things that can be done other than salary reduction. So I'd love to see, that kind of approach. And then on the final point, would we modify rewards for similar situations in the future? And I thought long and hard about this. And to be honest with you, I'm really not sure. As it turns out, we were already looking at our performance and rewards systems and programs and processes. Coming out of the Royal Commission last year, we were required to review a lot of our rewards anyway. So we were already in the process of reviewing and coming up with a new reward strategy. What I would say is, it's definitely worth a look at things like flexibility in your job architecture, job hierarchies, your position management, the ability to move people around an organisation very, very quickly, to have remuneration reward practices that provide that flexibility or support it adequately with the right controls, but not in a constrained way. And then, yes, definitely look at kind of general flexibility and also policies around leave, and maybe shoring up a little bit in the liability bank that could be used for this kind of crisis. So those were, the thoughts that I had as I looked at this this case study. I'm sure there's a lot that I've missed. I'm sure that there's a lot that others would, like to add to that. I'm keen to hear others' ideas.
Thanks, Steve. And there's some ideas in the chat. I've got a few questions, but I'll pass it on to Darren to present his approach. So Darren, over to you.
Thanks, Stephen, and thanks, Steve. And I pretty much fundamentally could say ditto for most of what Steve said, but I think I might start with the communications approach. Similar to what Steve was saying is ask others. And I refer back to probably one of my favorite examples, and this is a long time ago, in a very large financial organization where one of the business units was in significant financial strife. And what it did is the leadership team of that business unit gathered all the staff together and said, we are not in a good situation. We will not survive the status quo, but we don't have all the answers, and we're looking to you as a staff to come to us and say, what do you think we could do? And the leadership team of that business unit were surprised by the number of people that came up to them and said, you know what, we've been talking about job sharing, and we've been too scared because of career consequences. Or I've been thinking of going on a sabbatical, or I've been thinking of doing part-time. And what they found was that the leadership team ended up having to make far fewer cuts than they ever would have imagined because of the number of people that came forward with their own ideas in terms of how to survive that crisis by doing things that they were thinking about doing anyway, but may have been too afraid to ask for because of the culture of the organization. So I think very much in a situation like this is in a big change or a crisis, people fundamentally have a loss of control over their own destiny. And whatever you can do to then give them back that sense of control through transparent conversations and discussions, being vulnerable yourself, and asking for what do you think we can do to get through this. And the other thing, I'm surprised that Steve was saying that some people still view the situation sort of a black and white, me and them, without actually thinking that this may be about trying to keep as many people employed as possible, because I really think there's a sense of camaraderie and community happening right now in terms of being willing to make a personal sacrifice to ensure that my colleagues or others as much as possible are able to retain their employment. And be able to tap into that as part of your communications is that we are all in this together. And we may be asking everybody to consider what sort of sacrifices they might make in order to retain as many people, to give them as many jobs, while also ensuring that the company is sustainable and can see the other end of this. So that's from a communications perspective. But I mean, there's also be things that I'd be tapping into around annual leave. People have got big annual leave liabilities. My previous organization, we had people who had over a year of annual leave liability, and leveraging that. In terms of then the whole REM piece, in terms of bonuses, I mean, I can completely relate to your main character there. I've just joined. I've left the corporate world for the first time in 20 years to become a consultant. 2/3 of my bonus is my objectives are business development, and that's just been thrown out the window. So the owner and I have sat down with the entire team in terms of what actually is our new objective. And so our jobs have essentially changed. I was not chief research officer when I joined, but because of the changes, we saw an opportunity to scale back my business development requirements and push this whole research piece. That is now a new opportunity. We admittedly, I'll be honest, we've agreed and volunteered towards a temporary pay reduction as well to keep the business afloat for as long as possible to see the end of this. The whole idea of changing the performance system, I'm uncertain about that because there are so many variables to consider there in terms of the current situation. So my first gut feel would be don't change the system, but change the objectives to what is within control of the individual or of the team. Change those objectives, change the criteria. If necessary, change the responsibilities so that people can achieve something that's within their control or ability to influence. I'd probably say that we might have to consider that. I can't make any promises around performance bonuses because of loss of revenue. And I would be looking at just maybe potentially even saying no bonuses if I did the numbers and felt that those numbers would mean that I could retain more people for longer, because I could then make sure that the company can ramp up when we need to. Because I look at the GFC as an example, those companies that hacked and slashed struggled to come through the end of it. And those who tried to retain as many people as they could were able to turn back on very quickly, but also the employee engagement of those organizations were far stronger and more positive as well, because people felt that they were looked after and their best interests were looked after. So I think Steve was right. It's the end game is how can we retain as many people and tap into that sort of sense of community. The last thing to sort of just finish off is I'd also be really leveraging the leaders of the organization because this type of crisis, this type of situation is where leaders are defined and where they're made or broken. And this is their opportunity for all of us, really, to take this as a luxury and learn from it and become better from it. And I can guarantee everybody with 100% certainty that for 10 years from now, if not longer, every one of us who are currently managing a team are going to be asked by recruiters when we're applying for our next leadership role, what did you do for your people? How did you lead your people through this crisis? It will be the number one question. And so how will we lead our people is going to have immediate consequences for us in terms of our people and doing the right thing. But for our own learning and for our career in the future, what we do right now and how well we lead is potentially going to make or break our career in the future.
Thank you very much, Darren. That was very insightful, insightful approach. I've got a couple of questions which I shall present. Ask just after, I guess my own solution is very similar. A lot of overlaps is to, in the short term, reduce the sales target and commissions, proportionately. But in the long term, actually modify your reward system to cater for black swan events like this one. And the expectations from the sales force that if that event occurs, something like COVID, it probably will be something different. What is the expectation for them to, adapt and contribute, right? So start having that discussion. And I think that's also been, pointed out by Brad in the chat window, where he said, kind of collaborative sense making about how to react with the solutions, with just sitting in a room, management and employees, and trying to figure this out. And Darren kind of mentioned that there is a lot of camaraderie which kind of exists, and hopefully it'll persist after we're through this crisis. In terms of performance, my suggestion is that measure performance till before COVID for the bonus part, and then focus on development improvement, as Steve suggested, after COVID. So because that's the only thing that they can contribute. But in the longer term, kind of recognizing that if you build stronger customer relationships, it's very likely even through difficult situations, customers will persist with you and ask for your help. Added component of actually measuring the strength of relationship with customers and building that pipeline. And I guess finally, comms, like both Darren and Steve said, transparency, and also being very transparent with the financials impacting the business. The one question I do have for the panel and also for everybody, has this COVID situation kind of now created a world of have and have-nots? The haves are employees, and it's almost impossible to fire employees at the moment, even if you wanted to. I know of an organization which was planning workforce reduction cuts this month, but they've put it on stop till, because nobody wants to look bad or do the wrong thing or seem to be doing the wrong thing. But at the same time, people who are not in regular employment, so your contractors and contingent workforce, I don't think there've been, there are instances of Amazon agreeing to pay their contractors' salary for the next couple of months. But I'm just wondering, from the panel, also from the audience, is there now a world created where the haves are the people with employment, contracts, and the rest have to, I guess, suffer or indeed be exposed to that uncertainty? So would love to hear from you, Steve and Darren, what your thoughts are. It doesn't need to be your organization, but generally, do you think there's a two-speed employment world now?
We're certainly seeing that. And it's not unilateral, but there's been commitment to keep people, all full-time or employees employed. But at the same time, we're shutting down projects, and people who are associated with those projects are leaving the organisation. Now, some of them have home organisations to go back to, consulting firms and contractor agencies and so on. But that certainly seems to be the case, yeah.
Thanks, Steve. Darren, your thoughts?
Yeah, so I can see that Brad has said what I was just about to say, that in terms of the haves and have-nots, clearly the have-nots are casuals, part-timers, whatnot, people on that frontline service industry. They've been hit hard, and over the foreseeable future, they will continue to be hit the hardest. We've also, as in my own company, we've made decisions in terms, like I said before, I am now busier than I have been in a very long time, because so much of the work that we used to do, even before I joined the company, was farmed out to other coaches and consultants, a network that we tapped into, and we are the engine of that work. And now we're still the engine, and now I'm doing all the coaching and consulting myself. So what that means is those individuals out there in the network have been impacted far more than the core team. I also think it's not even just a question of haves and have-nots. I also think it's brought out the worst and the best of people. So there are organizations, there are ecosystems that are voluntarily working together. So with my company, again, some of our costs, those companies, I'm not going to mention them, have arbitrarily agreed we're going to cut our regular fees. Our rentals, they said arbitrarily we're going to cut it in half. We didn't even have to ask for that. So, but there's others that seem to be taking advantage of and being opportunistic. So there is a various haves and have-nots. There's the worst and the best, but I'm seeing far more of the best come out of people and out of organization than I am seeing of the worst.
Oh, look, I think that's something that we have to certainly keep in mind going forward. And I don't know how the dynamics are going to change, even for employees. It's going to be, just this Maslow's hierarchy. I think the security needs for everyone just increases. So I know that there's going to be a huge impact on startups, and I know there are a few people who belong to startups. I'm sure that they've suffered a lot. So just wondering, I've seen, I've got Dion and David and Brad and Dale, just Sam's there and Shah. So feel free to unmute yourself and kind of share your thoughts, either on your own experience or what you think about the situation where the people with jobs are kind of taken care of, and the life for the contingent workforce has become that much more difficult. Anyone? Brad, you're on mute if you're planning to speak. Okay, gotcha.
On the unmute button. Just something that's occurred to me is that with the hiring that's happened since the start of the lockdown, right? I think what I'm seeing and what I'm hearing from the conversations I'm having is that hiring managers and organizations are not thinking about what skill sets and capabilities do they need to help them navigate what's happening. The mindset is still, we're recruiting as business as usual before COVID-19 happened. So they're going with what's known and what's comfortable over rather than what's needed. And I'll give you an example. So I one of my work pathways is to get back into the not-for-profit sector. And I interviewed for a role with an organization just before COVID. And the feedback that I got from the recruiter was that in their shortlist, I was the only unknown candidate. Now, my background includes not just L&D, but organization design, knowledge management, and service design as well. And given what they needed to do at the start of the lockdown, was they needed someone with a strong service design background to be able to help them design a service that was dynamic to match the circumstances. But rather they went with the more traditional learning and development candidates, in fact, some of them they knew personally. And I think this is, and if I think about the other conversations that I've had with a few other people, the mindset, or I guess the mental models haven't really shifted for a lot of people in the recruitment and the employee experience. So how do we, it's almost like it feels like a lot of organizations and leaders are in this holding pattern. We will wait till we come out of this and go back to normal. And there is I don't think there will be a normal as such as what we were in before. But also it's a great opportunity to rethink how we're doing things, right? And I think Steve mentioned that before. It's like looking at why are we doing this particular process. It's redundant now because we never really took the opportunity to use it. So I think coupled with this looking at what skill sets and what capabilities do you need to navigate uncertainty, it's also around, really questioning, is what we're doing what we need, and does it add value to how we deliver our services? Thank you.
Thank you, Brad. And something that you brought up in that your piece was something also kind of impacts our next topic, which is kind of candidate experience, where we've seen from instances and anecdotes that the best jobs are never advertised. It happens. It's quite interesting, and that we'll kind of try and cover in the next month. I don't know if anybody else is willing to share their thoughts, or have. I know there's plenty of people in the audience. Each one of them probably have that, but feel free. I'll just feel free to unmute yourself and speak up. So I'll wait for you to speak up. In the meantime, while we're waiting, the slide on the screen kind of shows the end-to-end process, and with some impact of COVID, especially around the personal journey of employees. And you can see that box for performance, which is growth and learning. There's a need for security, both job and dollars, and I suspect that the security will be depending upon your life stage. Big emphasis on mental wellness. I think I know that my partner, my wife Liz, has actually got someone in her team who's an absolute extrovert, and she actually broke down because she just couldn't work in isolation for long. So there's a lot of mental wellness required for employees, and we discussed about contractors. But I think the one thing that COVID has certainly brought up, and Steve and Darren certainly shared examples of that, is the need for organizations and the learning systems and capability to actually help people adapt to new roles quicker. So it's been, stupendous transformation for, some people. And I know Jyoti in her comments is, talked about the healthcare workers, who've probably had to learn about COVID, which is kind of a new virus and still unknown. And there's a constant need to learn about the virus and the methods to do that. So it's another, hopefully in the webinar around learner experience, we might actually discuss the importance of having those adaptable, flexible, and open systems for learning. Jade has also sent in a comment about maintaining productivity and that work is important. And I think it's a struggle, especially for people who are still getting paid but don't have too much work to do, and work is pretty important contributor of our self-worth. So changing people's KRA in the short term. I'm reading Jade's comments. Yeah, actually, that's a very good point, Jade. Just with changing the KPIs to keep that in mind and giving them a sense that they are still contributing would be an excellent idea. So certainly there's lots to discuss, and obviously this is just a taster. So at this point in time, we've still got about a couple of minutes. You can see how we can continue with the keep in touch with eXassembly. Please do definitely spread the word about employee experience assembly and through the different means, and do come up to the meetups. But we've probably got I know Darren has to leave exactly at 2 p.m. but I'm happy to remain for the session to remain open and still have a discussion about anything pertaining to this topic if you wanted to, and if people want to leave. But if there's no other comments, insights, this is where we finish. But anybody want to say anything at all? Darren? Yeah.
Sorry, I just realized I could share one thing. A big learning that my team and I have discovered ourselves is I ran as an experiment with my team an online approach to scenario planning for the sole purpose of figuring out how do I deliver scenario planning to a client online? Can I practice that? But the feedback I got of it was quite surprising. The team felt so much more positive after that exercise about the future, because of they were talking about all the different sort of assumptions they had about what was going wrong, what wasn't, what might happen, what might not. Then all sort of came up through the woodwork. And in hindsight, yeah, my advice to anybody was, whether it's like a full-on scenario planning exercise, but to bring your team together and say, okay, well, what might happen in the future, whether it be 6 months, 12 months, what might that look like, and how might we position ourselves to be ready for that if it does occur. I'm finding when I talk to others now very quickly is that can have a very sort of positive, profound effect on people in terms of their view and their participation in something that's bigger, and this idea of tapping into purpose and their control of their own destiny. So that was a very recent learning this week that I'd share with others.
Thank you, Darren. And I think Brad also kind of talked about collaborative sense making and having that transparent discussion for a situation that none of us has ever experienced before, and that sense of camaraderie that is very much apparent in between employers and managers and the government. So everybody's trying to solve the problem, and hopefully some of that spirit remains. So I think this is where we finish. So thank you very much for everyone who's participated, and hopefully, this discussion has been a little value add. Obviously, there are no black and white answers, but certainly, hopefully that given some food for thought. And hope all of you will, subscribe to the mailing list and keep in touch with eXassembly and come for the next webinar. So thanks everyone, and keep safe.
Thanks, Stephen.
Thanks all. Thank you.
And special thanks to people from US and Singapore. Thank you very much, and hope to see you next time.
Thanks, Javen. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Jevin. Cheers all.
See you later.